Thunder cracked like a whip across the sky. Brad's hand was already buried in the old man's shoulder, fingers digging through layers of torn fabric, shoving hard. "I said get out!" His voice cut through the restaurant's low buzz. "I told you people, we don't serve trash here." Elijah stumbled forward, his boots, cracked, sole flapping loose, caught on the doorframe. He twisted, trying to catch himself. Brad shoved again. The old man hit the sidewalk, hard. One knee cracked against wet concrete. Rain hammered down, soaking through his coat in seconds, turning the rips and stains into dark patches that spread like oil. Inside, a woman in pearls glanced up from her steak, then looked away. Brad brushed his hands together like he'd touched something rotten. He straightened his tie, turned back toward the warmth and light. Then the Rolls-Royce arrived. No engine roar, just the whisper of 12 cylinders and the pinnacle of British luxury worth $250,000 gliding to the curb. Black paint so deep it looked like liquid night. The tires hit a puddle and sent a wave of dirty water straight across Brad's polished shoes. "What the hell?" The rear door swung open. A man stepped out. Italian suit, charcoal gray. The kind of fabric that didn't wrinkle, didn't stain, and probably cost more than Brad's car. Gold cufflinks caught the streetlight. His shoes clicked against the pavement, leather soles on wet stone. He walked straight past Brad like he wasn't there. Stopped in front of Elijah. He didn't bow. He took a knee, right there in the mud. His expensive trousers soaked up the filth. But he didn't care. He reached out and gripped the homeless man's shoulder firmly. "Chairman." His voice was loud enough to carry back through the restaurant door. "The board meeting is waiting for you, sir." He stood up, keeping a steady hand on Elijah to support him. He looked at Brad for the first time. "And who allowed this manager to touch you?" Brad's face drained. White, then gray, because he knew that voice. He'd heard it on training videos. Listened to it during the mandatory quarterly webinars, where everyone had to turn their cameras on and nod. David Coleman, the CEO, the man who owned not just this restaurant, but 17 others across 3 states. The man whose signature was on Brad's paychecks. The man Brad had fantasized about impressing for 2 years. That man was standing in the rain, kneeling for a homeless man. Brad's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Elijah stood there, water streaming down his face, dripping from his matted gray beard. He didn't brush himself off, didn't speak, just turned his head, looked at Brad. And Brad saw it. The thing he'd missed 5 minutes ago when he'd been too busy judging the torn coat and muddy boots. The eyes, sharp, cold. The kind of eyes that had made decisions bigger than Brad could imagine. The kind that didn't forgive. David Coleman was still staring at Brad, his jaw tight, waiting. What would you do if the homeless man you just kicked out turned out to be your boss's father? Stay until the end to see the price of arrogance. And hit that like button if you believe you should never judge a book by its cover. But to see how this karma hit him so hard, we have to rewind the clock. 3 days earlier. She leaned against a stack of napkin boxes, the paper in her hand trembling slightly. Not from cold, from the number printed at the bottom in bold red letters that seemed to get bigger every time she looked. Tuition due, 2847 Asserters. Final notice. Enrollment will be canceled if not received by Friday. Friday, 3 days away. Sarah folded the notice, unfolded it, creased it along the same lines she'd creased it 20 times already. The paper was getting soft, wearing thin at the fold. She counted the bills in her other hand for the 4th time that hour. 8 20s, 3 10s, handful of 5s, stack of 1s she'd smoothed out flat because wrinkled money felt like less somehow. $203. She'd been saving for 4 months. Every extra shift. Every double when someone called in sick. Every time a table left cash and she'd wanted, just once, to buy herself something. A new pair of jeans that didn't have a patch on the knee. A coffee that wasn't the burnt stuff from the restaurant's ancient machine. A meal she didn't have to cook on a hot plate in her studio apartment, where the landlord kept promising to fix the heat. $203. Financial aid covered tuition. Loans covered housing. But nothing covered the student fees line that stared at her in red ink. She'd been calculating it all out for 2 years, living on a budget so tight it didn't have room for error, for sick days, for emergencies, for tuition increases. The notice said the rate had gone up 15% this year. Cost of living adjustment, they called it. Like Sarah was living high and could afford the adjustment. She did the math in her head again. She'd done it so many times she could do it with her eyes closed. 203 in hand, another 140 in the bank. But that was already spent. Rent, electric, phone, food. Though she'd gotten good at stretching a 5-pound bag of rice and whatever vegetables were marked down at the grocery store. If she picked up every available shift between now and Friday, if she didn't eat, if every table tipped well and nobody stiffed her, she'd still be $2,000 short. The door cracked open. Maria stuck her head in, saw Sarah's face. "You okay?" Sarah shoved the notice into her apron pocket. Smiled. The smile she'd practiced in the mirror at home until it looked natural, until it didn't show the screaming underneath. "Yeah, fine. Just..." She waved the bills like they were nothing. "The tuition deadline's coming up." Maria stepped inside, closed the door, lowered her voice. "How much you short?" The smile stayed in place. "Not much. I'll figure it out." Sarah. "Really, I'm fine." Maria's face said she didn't believe it. Her face said she'd been there. Probably was there right now with her own bills, her own impossible math. But she just nodded. "Table 6 needs water, and Brad's in one of his moods, so..." "Yeah, got it." Maria left. The door swung shut with a sound like a cell locking. Sarah stayed there another 30 seconds, staring at the money in her hand. $203. She'd been hungry before. She could be hungry again. She pushed off the boxes. Her sneakers squeaked against the tile floor, the left one more than the right because the sole was separating. Every step sounded like a question. Squeak. How? Squeak. How? Squeak. How? 12 blocks to school, 8 hours on the floor. The cheap glue never stood a chance. Squeak, squeak, squeak. Sarah grabbed a water pitcher from the service station, checked her reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator door. Her ponytail was coming loose. The hair tie was stretched out, about to snap. She'd been using the same one for 3 weeks. 5 more days, and she could justify buying a new pack. Dollar store. 10 for $1. She adjusted it, tucked a loose strand behind her ear. Her stomach growled. She'd planned to use her employee meal voucher today. 1 free meal per shift. The only thing keeping her from complete starvation some days. But if she skipped lunch and dinner, if she saved the voucher and traded it to Miguel tomorrow, he always needed extras, always willing to pay cash. She could get maybe $5. $7 if she caught him after a good tip day. $7 closer. Outside the storage room, the restaurant hummed with wealth, silverware clinking against porcelain, laughter from the bar where drinks cost $15, the espresso machine hissing out $4 coffees, the sound of people who didn't have to count every dollar, who didn't know what a tuition notice felt like. Sarah stepped back onto the floor, smiled at table 6, poured their water with a steady hand, even though her own hand wanted to shake. The woman in pearls didn't look up from her phone, didn't say thank you. Just moved her glass an inch to the left, like Sarah had put it in the wrong spot. Sarah's sneakers kept squeaking. Squeak. How? Squeak. How? She didn't have an answer yet. The door chime rang at 2:47 p.m. Sarah glanced up from wiping down table 12, the one where a sticky patch of dried syrup fought back against every pass of her cloth. She saw the old man shuffle in, torn coat, actual holes at the elbows where the lining showed through, muddy boots leaving wet prints on the tile floor. Brad had made the busboy mop twice already today because standards matter. His gray beard looked like it hadn't seen scissors or soap in weeks. The old man moved slowly, like every step required a negotiation with his body. Sarah watched Brad's head snap up from behind the host stand. His spine straightened, his jaw tightened. It was that look he got when he was about to make someone's day worse and feel righteous about it. The old man didn't wait to be seated. He just walked. Slow, careful. One hand trailing along the wall for balance toward the corner booth. The one near the kitchen door where the overhead light flickered. The booth where they usually stuck employees on their breaks. He lowered himself into the seat. It took effort. His knuckles went white, gripping the table edge. Then he settled, hands folded. He didn't reach for a menu, didn't look for a server, didn't pull out a phone. He just sat there, taking inventory. His eyes moved slowly across the restaurant. He watched the couple near the window, arguing in whispers, too absorbed in their own misery to notice him. Then his gaze shifted to the center table. A group of 4, dressed in bright colors, laughing loudly over a bottle of champagne. They were celebrating, clinking glasses, radiant with joy. But when their eyes swept across the room, they slid right over Elijah. They didn't frown at him. They didn't look disgusted. They simply didn't see him. To them, he wasn't a person. He was just a shadow in the corner, invisible. That was the true luxury here, the privilege of ignoring what you didn't want to see. His gaze landed on Sarah. She looked away, grabbed the water pitcher. When she glanced back, he was still watching her. Not hungry, just evaluating, like a judge watching a defendant. Brad was already moving. He signaled to Marcus, the security guy by the bar. Sarah saw Marcus push off the counter. She moved faster. She cut across the dining room floor, weaving between tables, the water pitcher held like a prop. She reached the booth before Marcus could take 5 steps. "Good evening." She set down a paper napkin, the cheap kind, not the linen ones used for paying customers. "Can I start you with something to drink?" The old man looked up at her. His eyes were pale gray, watery around the edges but sharp underneath, like a blade that looked dull but could still cut to the bone. "Just water." His voice was rough, sandpaper dragged over gravel. Sarah poured. She watched his hand reach for the glass. It shook. Not a tremor exactly, more like a palsy. The glass rattled against his teeth when he drank. Water sloshed over the rim onto the table. He didn't apologize, just drank. Sarah grabbed a napkin to wipe the spill. "Can I get you anything else? A menu?" He set the glass down, looked at her again. "No menu." "Okay, just let me know if you need anything." She turned to leave. Brad stepped directly into her path. He didn't touch her. He knew better than to do that with cameras watching, but he loomed over her, invading her personal space. The smell of his expensive cologne was suffocating. "Sarah," he hissed, his voice low enough to keep the scene quiet but tight with menace. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" She looked past him. The old man was staring at the water glass, watching the ripples distort his reflection. Sarah took a breath. "My job." Brad didn't touch her. He just stepped sideways, using his bulk to block her path, turning himself into a wall that smelled of expensive cologne. "What are you doing?" His voice was low, controlled, the kind of quiet that meant he was furious and didn't want the customers to hear. Sarah kept her eyes on the old man in the corner. "Taking his order." "He's not ordering anything." Brad crossed his arms, muscles straining against his shirt. "Look at him. He's been sitting there 15 minutes, hasn't opened a menu, hasn't asked for anything except tap water. He's not a customer, Sarah. He's loitering. He asked for water. I gave him water. That's my job. Your job is to serve paying customers." Brad stepped closer, invading her personal space. "Not to waste time on what?" Brad's jaw worked. He didn't say it. But Sarah heard it anyway in the pause, in the way his eyes flicked toward the corner booth and away again, like looking too long might contaminate him. "He's taking up a table during dinner rush." "It's 2:47. We don't have dinner rush for 3 hours." "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" Brad leaned in, close enough that she could see the vein pulsing in his temple. "The point is, he doesn't belong here. Look at him. Look at this place. We have standards." Sarah looked around briefly. The polished luxury stood in stark contrast to the huddled shadow in the corner. She looked at Brad, at his pressed shirt and his perfect hair and his name tag that said manager, like it meant something important. "He's a person," Sarah said. "That's the only standard that matters." Brad's face flushed. "You don't get to decide. I'm getting him food." "Excuse me?" "He's hungry. I'm getting him food." "He hasn't ordered." "The fried chicken special, mashed potatoes, extra gravy. He told me when you were in the office." Brad's eyes narrowed. "I was in the office for 2 minutes." "He orders fast." "Sarah, I already put it in." She stepped around him, moving decisively toward the kitchen, heart hammering against her ribs. "Should be ready in 10. Behind her, Brad's voice. "If this comes back on me." Sarah pushed through the kitchen door. Let it swing shut behind her. Let the noise swallow whatever threat he was building. The kitchen was chaos, always was. Orders firing, pans clattering, Miguel cursing at the grill in Spanish. Creative cursing that Sarah had learned meant the stove wasn't heating evenly again, steam rising. Heat thick enough to choke on. She went to her locker, the metal one with the dent in the door from when someone had kicked it in frustration, spun the combination, opened it. Her employee meal voucher was tucked in the side pocket of her bag. She pulled it out, looked at it. 1 free meal per shift. The policy was clear. Use it or lose it. She didn't need to calculate the value again. She knew exactly how much cash this paper was worth if she gave it to Miguel. She knew how many textbook pages, how much of that dream stethoscope it represented. She held the voucher between her fingers, felt the paper, the stamp in the corner that said it was valid. Her stomach growled again, louder this time, angry. She thought about the old man's hands, the way they shook, the knuckles swollen like they'd been broken and healed wrong. Hands that had worked hard and had nothing to show for it. She thought about the way he'd looked at the water, like it was the first clean thing he'd had all day. Sarah closed her locker, walked to the kitchen window where Miguel was plating. "Miguel." He looked up, saw her face. "You okay?" "I need a favor." "Always?" She handed him the voucher. "Chicken special, extra gravy, hot." Miguel took the voucher, looked at it, looked at her. "This is yours." "I know. You eat today?" "I'm fine." "Sarah, please, Miguel, just make it hot, and make it good." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly, turned to the grill. "You're too good for this place, you know that?" Sarah didn't answer, just pressed her hand against her stomach, hard, like she could push the hunger down, make it smaller, make it manageable. The kitchen smelled like everything she couldn't have. Roasted chicken, fresh bread, the herbs Carlos grew on the windowsill and used to make everything taste better than it had any right to. Sarah's mouth watered, physically hurt. She swallowed, turned away from the grill, focused on the wall, on the schedule posted there, on anything except the food. "Order up." 10 minutes felt like an hour. Miguel slid the plate across the window, steam rising, chicken golden and crispy, mashed potatoes with a well of gravy in the center, green beans on the side that still had color, weren't overcooked. Sarah picked up the plate. The heat soaked through to her palms. She carried it through the dining room, past Brad, who was watching from the host's stand with his arms crossed, to the corner booth. She set the plate down in front of Elijah. The old man looked at it, then at her. "I didn't order this." "I know." Sarah kept her voice low. Brad was still watching. "But you're eating it anyway." "I can't pay." "You don't have to." She straightened, adjusted the plate so the fork was on the right side. "Take your time. Eat slow. He can't see you from that angle if you stay in the corner." Elijah's hand hovered over the fork, shaking. "Why?" Sarah didn't have a good answer, didn't have a noble reason. Just knew that watching someone go hungry when she could do something about it felt worse than being hungry herself. "Because you need it more than I do." She turned before he could argue, walked back toward the kitchen. Behind her, she heard the scrape of fork against plate, heard him eating like he hadn't seen food in days. Sarah pressed her hand to her stomach again. The hunger was getting worse, sharper, the kind that made her lightheaded if she stood up too fast. 8 more hours. She could make it 8 hours. She'd done it before. Brad lasted exactly 12 minutes. Sarah watched him from across the dining room. She saw the way he kept checking his watch, the gold plating catching the light. She saw the way his jaw muscles bunched and released, the way he tapped his pen against the host stand. Tap, 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 like a timer counting down to an explosion. She was refilling coffee at table 9 when he finally moved. There was no hesitation this time. No looking around to see who was watching. He cut a straight line across the dining room floor, his footsteps heavy and purposeful. A predator who had decided it was time to feed. Sarah set down the coffee pot, Her hands were shaking. She was too far away to stop him, too far away to do anything except watch the disaster unfold. Brad stopped at the corner booth. Elijah was halfway through the meal. He was eating slowly, methodically, savoring each bite of the chicken, each forkful of the mashed potatoes, as if he were trying to memorize the taste. For a man who likely hadn't eaten a hot meal in days, this wasn't just food. It was dignity on a plate. Finished? Brad's voice cut through the ambient jazz music like a gunshot. Elijah looked up. He didn't answer immediately. He chewed, swallowed, and wiped his mouth with the paper napkin Sarah had given him. I asked if you're finished. Brad's voice rose. Louder now, performative. The businessman at the next table glanced over, annoyed. The woman in pearls paused with her wine glass halfway to her lips. Elijah looked at the plate. There was still a piece of chicken left, a mound of potatoes. Almost, Elijah said. His voice was calm, a stark contrast to Brad's rising heat. Almost isn't good enough. Brad reached down. He didn't ask. He didn't wait. He grabbed the edge of the plate with both hands and pulled. The fork clattered against the table, spun, and hit the floor with a sharp metallic ring. Hey! Sarah started running toward them, abandoning her station. Brad stood there holding the plate. The steam was still rising from the food. He looked at it with a sneer. Then he looked at Elijah. You don't pay? You don't play. That's how the world works. He turned and walked 3 steps to the busing station, and he scraped the food into the trash bin. Scrape, thud, all of it. The chicken Miguel had grilled with care. The potatoes, the green beans. The meal Sarah had traded her own hunger for. The $7 she needed for tuition. The sacrifice she had made with her empty stomach. Gone. Buried under used napkins and coffee grounds. Sarah felt something twist violently in her chest. It wasn't just waste. It was violence. Brad set the empty plate down on the busing cart with a loud clatter. He turned back to Elijah, wiping his hands as if he'd touched something contagious. Now, Brad said, looming over the table. Get out. Elijah sat very still. His hands were resting on the table, flat, fingers spread wide. Sarah reached the booth, breathless. Brad, you can't. Shut up, Sarah. Brad spun on her. His face was flushed, sweat beading on his forehead. You think I don't know? You used a voucher. You lied to me. You undermined my authority in front of my staff. He stepped closer to her, pointing a finger in her face. Consider your pay docked for this month. Every cent of that meal comes out of your check. And if you say one more word, you're fired. Try paying tuition with no job. Sarah froze. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Brad turned back to Elijah. The old man hadn't moved. He hadn't flinched when the plate was taken. He hadn't spoken when Sarah was threatened. But his eyes had changed. The dull gray was gone. In its place was something cold, something ancient. I said move, Brad barked. He grabbed the water glass, the one thing Elijah had actually asked for. Deaf? Or just stupid? Brad jerked his hand. It looked accidental, but it wasn't. The water splashed out in a wide arc. It hit Elijah full in the face. Cold water dripped from his beard, soaked into the collar of his already ruined coat, spread across the table like a dark omen. The restaurant went dead silent. The jazz music seemed to stop. The clinking of silverware ceased. Every eye in the room was fixed on the corner booth. It was that heavy, suffocating silence that happens when a line has been crossed, and everyone knows it. But everyone is too cowardly to speak. Under the table, Elijah's right hand curled into a fist. The movement was instinctive. Muscle memory triggered by the adrenaline. Flashback. The jungle, the rain, the smell of cordite and wet earth. The feeling of a K-bar knife in his hand. The training that taught him exactly how much pressure it takes to collapse a windpipe. How to dislocate a shoulder with a simple twist. How to end a threat in less than 2 seconds. Elijah looked at Brad's neck. It was exposed. Vulnerable. He could end this. Right now. He could stand up, and before this soft, cologne-drenched boy knew what happened, he would be on the floor gasping for air. The rage flared in Elijah's chest, hot and familiar. The soldier in him screamed to engage, to defend, to neutralize the target. But then he looked at Sarah. She was trembling. Tears standing in her eyes. She wasn't looking at Brad. She was looking at him, pleading silently. Service to others is the highest rank. If he fought now, he was just a violent vagrant. If he fought now, she lost her job, she lost her tuition. The fist under the table unclenched. Slowly, finger by finger, the soldier stood down. The father stepped up. Elijah took a breath. He wiped the water from his face with his sleeve. Slowly, with the creaking of old joints, he stood up. He didn't look at the floor. He didn't look at Sarah. He looked directly at Brad. He didn't speak. He didn't shout. He just stared. It wasn't the stare of a victim. It was the stare of a sniper acquiring a target. A look that stripped Brad naked, peeling away the suit and the title and leaving only the small, frightened man underneath. Brad took a step back. He didn't know why, but a chill ran down his spine. Elijah turned. He walked past Sarah, pausing for just a fraction of a second to nod. A silent thank you. Then he walked out into the rain, leaving Brad standing there, victorious in the battle but completely unaware that he had just lost the war. The patience of an old soldier is about to break. But true strength isn't about what you do. It's about what you hold back. What does Brad deserve for this? Comment karma below if you're ready to see justice served. The rain was the kind that didn't care about you. Cold, heavy. The kind that soaked through everything in seconds and kept going. The kind that found every hole in your clothes, every gap in your shoes, every weakness in your defenses. Sarah caught up to Elijah halfway down the block. He was walking slowly, unsteady. The wet coat hanging heavy on his shoulders, pulling him down. Each step looked like it cost him something. Wait! He stopped. Didn't turn around. Just stood there in the rain, water streaming down his face, dripping from his beard. Sarah came around to face him, saw his eyes, still that cold gray, but something else in them now. Something tired, defeated. Like the last 15 minutes had taken whatever fight he'd been holding on to and wrung it out. You don't have to, she started. I know. His voice was even rougher now. Wet, like the rain had gotten into his lungs. I'm going. That's not what I meant. She pulled off her cardigan. The gray one. Thrift store find from 2 years ago when he'd first started at the restaurant and needed something that looked professional enough, but cheap enough for her orientation paycheck. It had a hole in the left elbow where she'd caught it on a nail. She'd sewn it up 3 times now. The stitches showed if you looked close. Uneven, amateur, but it was wool blend. Warm. The warmest thing she owned besides her winter coat, which was currently in her apartment because she'd thought the rain would stop. She draped it over his shoulders. Here. Elijah looked down at the cardigan, then at her. She was standing there in just her uniform shirt, thin polyester that was already plastered to her skin, showing the outline of the tank top underneath. No insulation, no protection. You need this. His hand came up like he was going to take it off. I have another one. The lie came easy, smooth. She'd gotten good at lying about what she had, what she could afford, what was fine. You're freezing. I'm fine, you're... She looked at him, really looked. At the way he was shaking, at the blue tinge to his lips, at the way his breath came out in short gasps. You need it more? He didn't argue anymore, just pulled the cardigan tighter around his shoulders. It barely fit, too small for his frame even though he was thin. But it was something. Sarah reached into her apron, the pocket where she kept her tips, where she'd been keeping the money she'd counted that morning in the storage room. Her fingers found the bills, sorted through them by feel. The 20s, the 10s, the 1s. She pulled out a 10, held it for just a second. $10. $10 that was supposed to be part of the 203. $10 that could be food for 3 days if she was careful. Rice, eggs, marked down vegetables. $10 that was now a void in her pocket because she had likely just lost her job. She pressed the bill into his hand, closed his fingers around it. There's a shelter on 5th Street. This is enough for a bus ticket and some hot soup. Don't walk, please, it's too cold. Elijah stared at the money. His hand was shaking harder now, from cold or something else. I can't take this. Yes, you can. You need... I'm fine. That lie again. Easier this time. Practiced. Please. It's going to get colder tonight. The shelter has beds, food. It's warm. A car passed. Headlights swept across them both. For just a second, Sarah saw his face clearly. Every line, every wrinkle, every year of hard living etched into skin that had seen too much sun and not enough kindness. Every bit of exhaustion that came from being invisible, from being the person people looked through instead of at. He looked at her for a long moment. Really looked. Not the way Brad had looked at him, with disgust, with judgment. And not the way the customers had looked at him, with discomfort, with the desire to not see. He looked at her the way a person looks at another person, with recognition, with respect, like he was memorizing her face, her rain-soaked hair, her too thin uniform, her ratty sneakers with the sole coming apart, like he was filing it away somewhere important. What's your name? His voice was quieter now, almost gentle. Sarah. He nodded once. Thank you, Sarah. Then he turned, started walking toward the corner where the streetlight flickered. Sarah stood there. She didn't go back inside immediately. She stood under the edge of the awning, arms wrapped tight around her chest, shivering uncontrollably. The cold hit her all at once, without the cardigan, without the movement, just the rain and the wind and the temperature dropping. Her teeth started to chatter. She had $193 left, and a massive tuition bill due Friday. She had no coat. She had 12 blocks to walk home in shoes that were letting in water. And her stomach hurt so bad from hunger and stress and fear that she wanted to sit down on the wet sidewalk and just give up. But she watched until Elijah turned the corner, until the gray cardigan disappeared into the rain and the dark, until she was sure he was gone. Then she started walking, 12 blocks, in the rain, in the cold. Her shoes started to squeak again, squeak, squeak, squeak. A lonely, rhythmic sound in the pouring rain. Sarah kept walking, didn't let herself think about the math, didn't let herself think about Friday. Just walked. One step, then another, then another. The rain kept falling. The sound of Sarah's squeaking shoes, squeak, 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 faded into the darkness of 3 days ago. But the rain never stopped. It kept falling, a relentless drumbeat leading right up to this very moment. And then the silence was shattered. Screech. The sound of precision brakes tearing against wet pavement brought the world crashing back to the present. We are back at the climax. The moment the world turned upside down. The Rolls-Royce Phantom sat at the curb, its engine purring like a resting beast. The wipers cut smooth, rhythmic arcs across the windshield, indifferent to the drama unfolding outside. Brad stood frozen on the sidewalk, his hand still extended from the shove. The blood had drained from his face, leaving it the color of wet ash. His mouth hung open, but the arrogant shouts from seconds ago had died in his throat. He stared at the man in the charcoal Italian suit kneeling in the mud. He stared at the homeless man he had just called trash. David Coleman, CEO, the man whose signature was on every paycheck Brad had ever cashed, the man Brad had idolized from training videos, was on one knee. He didn't care about the dirty water soaking into his tailored trousers. He didn't care that his handmade leather shoes were submerged in a puddle. His posture was one of absolute submission and reverence. His hand was firm on Elijah's shoulder, supporting him with a tenderness that terrified Brad more than any shout could have. "Chairman," David repeated, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "The car is waiting." Elijah straightened, and in that moment, the transformation happened. It wasn't magic. It was a reveal. The hunched, painful posture of the homeless man vanished. His spine locked into place, shoulders squared, chin lifted. The frailty was gone, replaced by a terrifying solidity. He was no longer the trembling old man asking for tap water. He was the platoon leader who had guided men through hell and brought them back. He was the founder who had built an empire from nothing. He reached up. His hand grabbed the torn, waterlogged knit cap he'd been wearing for 3 days, the prop that had made him invisible. He pulled it off. Short, military-cut white hair gleamed under the streetlights. Water dripped from it, running down a face that was suddenly hard as granite. Elijah looked at the cap. Then he looked at Brad. He opened his hand. The cap fell. Splat. It landed right in the dirty puddle at Brad's feet. Mud splashed onto the manager's polished shoes. A discard. A silent declaration. The show is over. The test is done. "David," Elijah said. The gravel in his voice was gone. It was steel now, clear, resonant. The voice of a man used to giving orders and having them obeyed instantly. "Yes, sir," David answered, standing up but keeping his head lowered, refusing to look his father in the eye out of shame for what had happened. Elijah didn't look at his son yet. He turned, pointing a steady finger toward the restaurant entrance. Sarah was standing just inside the glass door. She had run to the front when she saw the commotion. She stood there shivering in her thin, soaked uniform, her hands covering her mouth in shock, her eyes wide. "Give that girl your jacket," Elijah commanded. "Now." David didn't hesitate. He stripped off his charcoal suit jacket, dry, warm, and worth more than Sarah's tuition, and signaled for his bodyguard. Get it to her, David snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. And make sure she's warm. The bodyguard ran to Sarah, draping the heavy, expensive fabric over her shoulders. Sarah shrank back, overwhelmed, but the warmth hit her instantly. Elijah turned back to Brad. Brad was shaking now, visibly, his knees knocked together, his lips moved, forming words that had no sound. I didn't know. Sir, Elijah took one step forward. Brad took 2 steps back, stumbling, nearly losing his balance on the wet pavement. The old man pointed a finger at Brad's chest, at the cheap plastic name tag that said manager, the badge Brad had used as a shield and a weapon all week. David, Elijah said, never taking his eyes off Brad. Where is the board of directors? They are waiting at the headquarters, sir, David replied quickly. The quarterly meeting starts in 20 minutes. Tell them to wait, Elijah said coldly. Brad flinched. Or cancel it, Elijah continued. I don't care. He stepped closer to Brad, invading his space just like Brad had done to Sarah. He loomed over the manager, his eyes burning with a cold fire. I have much more important business to handle right here. He pointed a thumb over his shoulder, toward the service entrance, toward the grease and the heat and the reality of the work. In the kitchen, Elijah declared. We're going to have a little performance review. David didn't raise his hand. He didn't need to. He just stood there, 6 feet from Brad, rain falling between them. And the silence was louder than any shout could have been. Brad's hand went to his face anyway, like his body was expecting the blow, bracing for it. It didn't come. David just looked at him, looked through him. The way you look at something that's broken and you're trying to figure out if it's worth fixing or if you just throw it away. Do you know? David's voice was quiet, controlled, the kind of quiet that made the rain sound loud. Do you have any idea who you just put your hands on? Brad's mouth moved, made shapes. No sound came out. That's my father. Each word came out separate, clear. The man who started this company 40 years ago, who worked 3 jobs to open the first restaurant. David noticed Elijah shivering violently under the wet coats. He saw Sarah trembling near the door. The anger in his eyes shifted to concern. Get under the awning, David commanded, guiding his father and Sarah toward the dry concrete of the entrance. Out of the rain. Now. They moved under the shelter of the overhang. David stood with them, a united front. Brad tried to step forward, to join them in the dry space. Stay there, David barked. He pointed to the edge of the curb. You stand in the rain. Brad froze. He stood alone in the downpour, water dripping from his nose and chin, looking up at the 3 people standing dry and elevated above him. The man who gave you a job, David continued, his voice echoing off the glass. When you had 3 write-ups from your last restaurant. When your own references said you had issues with authority. When nobody else would take a chance on you. David stared straight into Brad's eyes. My father read your file. He said everyone deserves a second chance. He said you reminded him of someone he used to know. David paused. Was he right? Brad's face had gone gray. I didn't know he was. He is. David's voice rose. Right now, he's homeless, by choice, testing our locations. He looked at his father. Every year he does this. He shows up looking like someone people would rather ignore. And he watches. Brad's hand dropped. You're testing us? Elijah spoke for the first time. I'm testing whether we mean what we say. His voice was tired. About dignity. About respect. He looked at Brad, not with anger, with sadness. 43 restaurants I've visited. You know how many managers failed? Brad didn't answer. 3, in 12 years. Elijah leaned against the dry wall, grateful for the shelter. You're number 4. Brad's voice came out broken. Mr. Coleman, please, I have bills. I have a car payment. Rent's due next week. You have responsibilities. Elijah nodded. So does everyone. That girl you just fired? The one wearing my son's coat? She walks 12 blocks to save bus fare. Goes hungry so she can make tuition. He stepped to the edge of the awning. Did you ask about her bills when you cut her schedule? Brad's throat worked. No sound came. David didn't pull out his phone. He simply held out his hand, palm open, expectant. Give me your keys, David said. His voice was final. Sir? Store keys, swipe card, name tag, now. Brad's shaking hands fumbled with his pocket. He unpinned the badge, dropped the keys into David's hand. You are terminated effective immediately, David stated coldly. I will instruct HR to process your final check tomorrow morning. You're firing me? Brad's voice cracked. Yes, and I'm ensuring every restaurant manager in our network knows exactly why. 43 locations. Brad's voice went thin with panic. That's blacklisting me. No, you won't work in this industry again. Brad looked at Elijah, at the only person who seemed to have any mercy left. Sir, please. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I'll apologize. I'll do whatever. You'll lose everything, Elijah said flatly. Your apartment, your car, your credit. Yes. Brad's voice broke, tears mixed with the rain. Yes, I will. Elijah studied him. Brad stood shivering, soaked to the bone, stripped of his title and his dignity. He looked toward the restaurant, toward the kitchen door. You said you'll do anything? Elijah asked. Brad nodded frantically. Anything, sir. Elijah was silent for a long moment. His eyes were sharp as a scalpel. Good. Then let's see if you really want to save your life. Brad stood in the rain. The water soaked through his manager's shirt, the one he'd ironed that morning, the one with his name embroidered on the pocket in script that was supposed to look important. It didn't look important anymore. Just wet. A few feet away, under the warm, dry glow of the entrance lights, Sarah stood next to Elijah. She looked tiny, swallowed up in David's charcoal suit jacket. She didn't leave. She couldn't. She stood there, shivering, eyes wide, watching the man who had terrorized her shift, now begging for his life. Please. The word came out broken. Mr. Coleman, I understand I'm fired. I understand. But the dishwasher job, is that real? Or are you just... He stopped, glanced at Sarah. Shame burned in his eyes. Just making me beg. Just twisting the knife in front of her. David looked at his father. Elijah nodded once. It's real, David said, his voice cutting through the sound of the rain. $18 an hour, 40 hours guaranteed. Night shift, Tuesday through Saturday. You'll get the same benefits package as every hourly employee. Health insurance after 90 days. 2 weeks vacation after a year. Brad's eyes went wet. Not quite crying. Close. You're serious? Dead serious. My father doesn't lie. If he offers you work, he means it. Brad's voice cracked. I don't understand. Why? After what I did? Elijah shifted under his layers of coats. He stepped to the very edge of the dry concrete, looking down at Brad. You know why I do this? He gestured at himself, at the torn clothes, the muddy boots. Every year, 2 weeks living on the street. Brad shook his head, water dripping from his nose. Because I grew up poor, real poor, hungry poor. Elijah's voice was quiet but steady. My mama worked 3 jobs, still couldn't always keep the lights on. We ate a lot of church suppers, charity meals, government cheese. He looked at the restaurant, at the building he'd built from nothing. And I remember how people looked at us, like we were less than, like being poor meant being dirty, being lazy, being worthless. His eyes came back to Brad, like we didn't matter. Brad's head dropped. I swore when I made something of myself I'd never forget that. Never let my people forget that. Elijah's voice got stronger. That everyone deserves to be seen, to be treated with respect, no matter what they look like, where they sleep, how much money's in their pocket. He pointed a finger at Sarah. That girl. She gave me her food, her coat, her last $10, while you tried to throw me out like garbage. Do you know why? Brad swallowed hard. Because she's kind. Because she knows what it feels like, Elijah corrected. She knows the pain of being invisible. And now, I want you to know it too. He pointed to the service entrance around the side, the dark alleyway. That's why I'm offering you the job, not to punish you, to teach you. By making me wash dishes, Brad whispered. By showing you what honest work feels like, Elijah said firmly. Miguel, the man who'll train you, he's been doing this for 20 years, raised 3 kids on a dishwasher's salary, put 2 through college, never missed a day, never complained. He let that settle. He's got more dignity, more strength, more character in his little finger than most executives have in their whole bodies. You're going to learn from him, if you're humble enough to listen. Brad wiped his face. Rain or tears, hard to tell. What if I'm not good at it? Then you'll learn, Elijah said gently. Everybody's bad at something the first time. That's not failure. That's just being human. David spoke up, his voice hard. But you need to understand the terms. You're starting over, bottom of the ladder. You don't get special treatment because you used to be a manager. You show up when you're scheduled. You do the work Miguel assigns. You treat everyone with respect. David nodded toward Sarah. Especially her. She is now your assistant manager. Brad froze. He looked at Sarah. Sarah froze too, clutching the lapels of the oversized jacket. Assistant manager, Brad stammered. Yes, Elijah said. Part-time. She needs the experience for nursing school, and we need someone who understands our values. He stared Brad down. Do you have a problem taking orders from her? Brad swallowed hard. He pulled out his wallet, looked at the car payment notice, the number that had been haunting him. 6 days to come up with 487s. He did the math in his head. $18 an hour, 40 hours, first paycheck in 2 weeks. After taxes, maybe 150. Enough for rent, for the car, for food if he was careful. Enough to survive while he figured out what came next. He looked at the kitchen door, at the back entrance he'd never used in 3 years, the entrance he'd considered beneath him. I used to walk by Miguel every day, Brad said quietly. Never once asked him how he was doing. Never learned his kids' names. His voice broke. I didn't see him. Didn't see any of them. No, you didn't, Elijah said. But you can start seeing now, if you choose to. Brad looked at him. At this man he'd thrown onto the sidewalk, who was now offering him a lifeline he didn't deserve. "I'll take it," Brad whispered. He turned to Sarah, his voice shaking. I'm sorry, Sarah, for everything. I'll do whatever you say." Sarah didn't speak. She just gave a small nod, a nod of forgiveness, or maybe just shock. "Good," Elijah said. "Miguel expects you Monday morning, 6 a.m. sharp. He'll have a uniform ready. Bring a water bottle. Kitchen gets hot." Brad nodded slowly. 6 a.m., Monday. "That's right. Mr. Coleman, thank you. I'll do better, I promise." Elijah put his hand on Brad's shoulder. Just for a moment, a gesture of connection across the rain. "I believe you, son. Now go on home. Get some rest." Brad nodded. He backed away, turning toward his Audi, the car that was costing him too much, that he'd bought to look successful, that was now just a reminder of everything he'd gotten wrong. He got in, started the engine, sat there for a moment watching the rain on the windshield. Then he drove away. David watched him go. "You think he'll actually show up?" Elijah pulled the cashmere coat tighter, smiled slightly. "Yeah, I do." "How do you know?" "Because he finally saw himself." Elijah looked at his son. Really saw himself. That's the first step to changing. He turned around, faced Sarah. She was still standing there, huddled in the expensive jacket, her torn sneakers soaked through. Elijah smiled, a gentle, grandfatherly smile. "Now, Miss Miller," he said softly, "I believe we have some business to discuss. About your tuition and about a new pair of shoes." Sarah burst into tears, not from sadness, from relief. David opened the rear door of the Rolls-Royce. "After you," David said. "Let's get you home." 6 months later. Sarah pushed through the restaurant door at 5:47 p.m. Her backpack was heavy, pharmacology textbook, clinical procedures binder, notes from today's lab. The name tag on her shirt was different now. Sarah Mitchell, supervisor. Maria looked up from the host stand. "How was class?" "Long, but good." Sarah dropped her backpack in the office. The Coleman Foundation scholarship letter was still pinned to the bulletin board. She touched it like she did every shift, a reminder that miracles happen. She grabbed an apron, tied it on. "We good for tonight?" "Fully booked." Sarah nodded and stepped onto the floor. The restaurant looked the same, but it felt different. She walked through the dining room, through the kitchen door. The kitchen was organized chaos. Orders firing, Miguel singing, Carlos plating. And there, at the industrial sink, was Brad, elbow deep in soapy water, hair damp with sweat. The restaurant t-shirt stretched across shoulders that were leaner now, harder. 6 months of real work had burned away the soft edges. His hands were raw, cracked, the hands of someone who knew what honest labor felt like. But his eyes had changed most. Quieter, more focused, the arrogance replaced by something steadier. A new kid, 17, first week, stood beside him, holding a stack of plates like a bomb. "Like this, see?" Brad's voice was patient. "Small plates on top. Trust me, you don't want to explain to Miguel how you broke 6 dishes your first week." The kid laughed, relaxing. Brad watched him, ready to catch the plates if they fell, just like someone had caught him 6 months ago. Miguel called out from the grill. Brad laughed, a real laugh, and called back. 6 months ago, Brad didn't know Miguel had 3 kids. Now he knew their names. He knew Miguel's daughter wanted to be a vet. 6 months ago, Miguel was invisible. Now he was the man who had taught Brad that dignity wasn't about a title. Sarah grabbed a pitcher, filled it with ice water. She remembered the last time water had mattered. The glass dumped in anger, the silence. This time she poured with care. She walked over, set the glass down gently. Brad looked at it, then at her. Recognition flickered in his eyes. Shame turned into gratitude. "Break time," Sarah said quietly. He wiped his hands, took the glass, drank deep. "Thanks, boss." No sarcasm, just respect. The respect of a soldier for a fellow soldier. Sarah started to turn. "Sarah." Brad stopped her. I never said thank you. For that day. For seeing me even after I showed you who I was. "You showed me who you were then," Sarah said. "You're showing me who you are now. That's what matters." She walked back to the dining room. The dinner rush hit. Sarah was seating a table when she saw them. Elijah and David Coleman, walking in together, both in suits, Elijah in charcoal, David in navy, no torn coats. Just two men who had built a legacy. Sarah grabbed menus. "Good evening, gentlemen." Elijah smiled. "Sarah, good to see you thriving." "Thank you, sir, for everything. You earned it." She seated them near the window. "Sarah," Elijah said. She turned. He was looking at her supervisor tag. "You know what makes a diamond?" She shook her head. "Pressure, heat, time." He paused. "Turns carbon into something valuable. Same with people. Adversity doesn't break us. It shows us what we're made of." He glanced toward the kitchen, where Brad was working, where Miguel was leading. "You chose kindness when it cost you everything. He chose to learn when it cost him his pride." Elijah looked back at Sarah. His eyes were serious, filled with the wisdom of a lifetime. "I used to think being a chairman was the top of the mountain," Elijah said softly. "But you two taught me something important." He looked from Sarah to the kitchen door. "Service to others is the highest rank, and you both wear it well." Sarah felt her throat tighten. She nodded, tears pricking her eyes. "Thank you, sir." Elijah's smile was warm. "Thank you, Sarah, for reminding an old man why he built this place." She went back to work. Later, after the last customer left, Sarah sat in the office, textbook open. Studying for finals she knew she'd pass, working a job she'd earned, building a life she'd chosen. One small act of kindness at a time. Sarah chose compassion. Brad chose change. What will you choose today? Share your story in the comments. And subscribe for more stories about the power of human kindness every single day.